For many of you, what I'm about to say will be a shock. In 2001, Ukraine secretly sold 12 cruise missiles to Iran through Cypriot offshore companies. The range is 3,000 kilometers. Think about that. 3,000 kilometers. Just imagine where those missiles could reach. These missiles were designed for one purpose: to reach Israel from Iran. 12 of them. Everyone knew about it, the buyers and the sellers. The money went to the Ukrainian budget, but maybe not all of it. In May 2026, 27 days ago, the president of that same Ukraine wrote a personal letter to the president of the United States of America. There was one request in the letter: give us Patriot missiles. You know, what are they called? PAC-3. How are we supposed to intercept Iranian drones and Iranian missiles that Russia is launching at our cities? What Ukraine sold to Iran to shoot at Israel is now being used to shoot at Ukraine. The only thing that can save Ukraine is Israel's victory over Iran. Today I'll tell you how we all end up in this trap. Whether it's karma or geopolitics, I don't know. But the symmetry is striking, isn't it? Right? Let's take a look at the history of Ukraine's relations with Iran since the formation of the new Ukraine naturally after the collapse of the Soviet Union. 1991, Iran is the first to recognize Ukraine's independence. That was in December. The 1990s, 8 ministerial visits between Iran and Ukraine, President Kravchuk in Tehran. Twin brothers, we kiss each other right on the lips. 1992, Ukraine sells 8 anti-ship missiles to Iran. Mosquet, sunburn. That's what we call it. 2001, that's already Kuchma, right? Ukraine secretly sells 12 cruise missiles to Iran, those very same X-55S 3,000 kilometers. That means they're capable of striking Israel directly from Iran. It's documented. The money went through Cypriot offshore accounts. Thank you, dear Ukrainians. We received your regards. 2016. Ukraine, as a member of the UN Security Council, votes for resolution 2334. Do these numbers mean anything to you? Just numbers, right? Condemning Israeli settlements. And the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine publicly states that what is being done, what Israel is doing in Gaza, is comparable to the occupation of Crimea. Well, Israel immediately, of course, cancels the visit of the Ukrainian Prime Minister. In November 2022, Ukraine votes to refer the issue of Israel's occupation of Palestinian territories to the International Criminal Court. Where did they find Palestinian territories? Israel summoned the ambassador. Israel was told that it had to be done this way. In response, Israel does not support the resolution on reparations that Russia should pay to Ukraine. They say, well, no. In December 2022, Netanyahu calls Zelensky. Ukraine does not show up for the next anti-Israeli vote. You mean the vote, right? Notice they are not voting for Israel, but they don't show up for the vote. And I remember well how, when he came to Israel and spoke in the Knesset, Zelensky said, I am just like you. We are brothers. My grandfathers, along with your grandfathers, suffered from anti-Semitism. I love Israel. Israel must exist because it is a true home for the Jewish people, and I am one of them. And after that, you start to wonder why Ukrainians think that Israel, or Jews in general, might support them in their fight against Russia, with whom, by the way, Russia, Ukraine, and Iran are together. They constantly vote for Israel to be judged, for Israelis to be put on trial, for Israelis to be expelled, for Israelis not to be allowed to live normally, and for Israelis not to have the right to resist. In other words, to respond, to answer. So they say they love us, but they always vote against us. For your information, completely official data from the report of the so-called UN Watch. For 2015 to 2025, Ukraine voted for Israel. 0 votes. Against, 75%. Abstained, 25%. 0 for Israel. That is, 122 resolutions. Not once. Not once did they vote for Israel, and this is what a true friend is. And naturally, Ukraine got payback. Iran immediately betrayed Ukraine. That is, even Ukraine betrayed Israel. Well, in political life, this is called a boomerang. Shaheds. Well, it's mainly the Shahed 136. The main striking element of the Russian air campaign against Ukraine, that is, Iran is the main air supplier in the war against Ukraine. Just as Iranians and Ukrainian weapons were used to kill Israelis, now Iranian weapons are used to kill Ukrainians. The first thing I want to tell you, everything I'm saying is completely factual. A dry record, Ukraine has sold to Iran over the past 30 years, voted with Iran on Israel. And who is paying for this now? No emotions, just numbers and resolutions. Nothing else. No emotions at all. Of course there's emotion. Yes, second. Let me explain the mechanics to you. Why the missiles that are now protecting Tel Aviv physically cannot protect Kyiv at the same time. American ones. And how this turns the war between Israel and Iran into the #1 factor in Ukraine's deepening situation. Survival. Third, the most inconvenient. Why does Ukraine still formally vote against Israel at the UN podium and not informally? In the Oval Office, for example, they pray for Israel to win as soon as possible because they really need American missiles to go not to Israel. Those who are honest enough to watch until the end will come out of this episode with a different understanding of how the world works. But let's start with a bit of history. How, as they say, did it all begin? December 1991. The Soviet Union collapsed 3 weeks ago. Ukraine has been an independent country for less than a month. Who was one of the first to recognize Ukraine? Guess. Not the United States, not Germany. The Islamic Republic of Iran. What did the Ayatollahs want from them? And this is Ayatollah Rafsanjani. They were one of the first in the world to recognize the Ukrainian state, and a friendship begins. 30 years of friendship. It's what you might call close, nose to nose, which people in Kyiv don't really like to remember today. In the 1990s, 8 Iranian ministers visited Ukraine. 7 top Ukrainian officials, including President Kravchuk himself, fly to Tehran. They sign agreements, energy, transit, joint projects, and some secret projects as well. May-June 2001. The president of Ukraine was Kuchma by then. A secret deal is arranged through the state company Ukrspets Export. This deal became known. It is known that there were other deals, but the details are unknown. But this one came to light. 12 cruise missiles X-55, 6 to Iran and 6 to China. Later, it was confirmed that they went to Iran. Through China, all 12 were sent. They pretended to sell them to China, but in reality, they sold them to Iran. They even lied in secret documents. The range of each one, as I already mentioned, is 3,000 kilometers. That means a missile launch from central Iran can reach Tel Aviv. That's exactly what it did. These are missiles that during Soviet times carried nuclear warheads. Now they don't have warheads, but they still have the mounting points for them are still there. Ukraine secretly supplied Iran the carriers so they could launch missiles with nuclear payloads. What wouldn't you do for a friend, right? The money for the deal went through Cypriot offshore accounts. And nobody's hand reached them, not Kuchma, not anyone else. What are you talking about? The scandal actually came to light by accident 3 years later. When was that? In 2004, right? Because there were recordings made by a certain Major Melnichenko. The Ukrainian leadership at the time tried to deny everything, but it didn't work. There were documents, and everyone had already seen them and checked them and said they were real. This is not a moral issue, gentlemen. This is not about justice or injustice, no. This is physics, the physics of arsenals. What you send out will come back to you, and sometimes after 25 years. Sometimes through third parties, but it will come back. And at the same time, there's another line, not weapons, are voting at the UN. Take the UN Watch data, yes, the one I already mentioned. An independent Geneva-based organization that keeps track of every country's vote. They have a report on Israel. Every 10 years, from 2015 to 2025, 10 full years, Ukraine voted for Israel exactly 0 times. Out of 122 resolutions on Israel, Ukraine, in 75 cases, voted against Israel. In the remaining 25, well, I already gave you the numbers, abstained, not once, not a single time in 10 years. Not a single time in 10 years. Ukraine. I said, guys, are you out of your mind or what? What are you doing? Well, in response, Israel cancels the official visit of the Ukrainian Prime Minister, publicly condemns Kyiv in harsh terms. But there are no resolutions against Ukraine. Let's move forward 6 years. November 2022. The war is already ongoing. Ukraine desperately needs international support. And Ukraine votes for a resolution that refers the issue of Israel's occupation of Palestinian territories to the International Court. Israel summons the Ukrainian ambassador. Well, literally calls him on the carpet, as they say, right? I don't know if they kicked him or not. They can do that in Israel. They could have even kicked him. And a few weeks later, as I already said, Israel does not support the resolution on Russian reparations to Ukraine. Well, as they say, an eye for an eye. According to the Old Testament. Diplomatically, it makes sense, but I suspect there was also some kicking. And this 30-year record of voting against Israel has now turned into an IOU. Not a moral debt, but a pragmatic one that has to be paid to those who have the arsenal. Who do you depend on? The year is 2022. Russia starts a full-scale war. Russia's stockpile of high-precision missiles runs out in the first 6 months. They simply didn't expect it. Yeah, so what should they do? They need a cheap, expendable weapon for mass aerial attacks. So in June or July 2022, a Russian delegation flies to Iran, to the Kashan airfield. They inspect Iranian strike drones, Shahed 129, 191, and 136. This one, he says, this is exactly what we need. A few months later, there's an agreement. Iran sells the Shaheds themselves and also grants the right to produce them. They send specialists, they send parts, they send this, they send everything. And Russia begins mass production of these Shaheds under its own name, Giran, on its own territory, using Iranian parts. Well, and then, so to speak, and so on and so forth. And then we get what we're seeing today. Every week, hundreds of Shaheds hit Ukrainian cities. May 24, 2026. That very night I talked about yesterday. 90 missiles and 600 drones. 600. Well, and at the same time, the overwhelming majority of them are Shaheds made from Iranian parts and of Iranian design. Every drone that fell on Kharkiv, on Lviv, on Ukraine, on Odessa, even. This is, in fact, an echo of that very Iranian military program that Ukraine helped 30 years ago. Technology, political cover in the UN, missiles. God only knows what else they sold there. This, my dear friends, is the law that you won't find in any diplomacy textbook. Textbooks talk about national interest, but reality says that what you invested in someone else's military program 30 years ago comes back to you. Sometimes at the most inconvenient moment, and sometimes with interest. And it comes back in a form you never even thought of. Well, as our ancestors used to say, what you sow, you'll have to swallow. I want to address those of you who have watched up to this point. A like is a signal to the algorithm and its majesty, the algorithm, that there are people, meaning you, who are ready to listen not to 2-minute news with flashy headlines, but to a 30-minute analysis, a 15, 20, or 30-minute analysis with dates, details, and so on. And if you want these links to reach not only you, but maybe one person you'd like to influence as well, send this episode to him or her. And that's enough. Just one person. And next time to a friend. So subscribe to the main channel down below and hear every day 30 minutes of news and analysis. In one video, sometimes I split it into 2 for a whole range of reasons, that is, completely different topics, sometimes into 2. And now, the most pressing issue. If the first half was called Boomerang, then the second will be called Link. May 2026. That is this year. The United States is conducting an operation called Epic Fury, Epic Outrage, Epic Fury, against Iran's missile infrastructure. At the same time, Israel is defending its skies from Iran's response, and here is the key physics, without which nothing can be understood. the main defensive weapon, the Patriot system with missiles. That's exactly what I was talking about, PAC-3. This is the most advanced and most expensive means of intercepting ballistic missiles in the Western arsenal. It's produced by Lockheed Martin at a single plant in the city of Camden, Arkansas, so the production rate is a few hundred per year. Well, that used to be enough. In peacetime, that was more than sufficient. But in wartime, when two countries are fighting at the same time, that's catastrophically little. Every PAC-3 missile launched over Haifa is a PAC-3 missile that physically won't make it to Kyiv. Every shift in Camden, at the plant in Camden, that went to replenish Israeli and, by the way, Saudi orders. That's a shift that didn't go. 4 deliveries to Ukraine. Now listen carefully to what I'm about to say. You won't hear it on any Ukrainian broadcast. The longer the war in Iran goes on, the fewer chances Ukraine has to survive this winter. And the opposite is also true. The faster Israel and the U.S. close the Iranian front, the more PAC-3 missiles will be freed up for Ukraine. This means literally and materially that Zelensky now has only one prayer, and it's not for himself and not against Putin, but for Israel's victory over Iran. The victory of the villain over a friend, a swift, decisive one, so that the American arsenal will be freed up to supply Ukraine. Zelensky will never say this, publicly, of course, right? 30 years of voting against Israel hang like a weight, at least at Ukraine's Ministry of Foreign Affairs level, but actually even higher. I can't bring myself to say something like that, but in the letter that I sent, I think that's Stefanishina, my God. Stepashkina, Stefanishvili, Stefanishina. This Wednesday, she brought it to the White House and to Congress. That's exactly what you can read between the lines. Ask yourselves, my dear friends, in what other world besides this real one can you see a country voting against Israel for 30 years, which now depends on Israel's military victory for its own survival, against the one Ukraine has been friends with for 30 years and, as they say, kissed passionately, lip to lip? Here is where another layer begins. Unfortunately, it's a painful one for Ukrainian patriots, but it's an honest one. Israel is not stupid after all. You can say terrible things, call them all sorts of nasty names, say they're fierce or whatever, right? But they're not stupid. The Israeli leadership remembers 2001, 2016, and 2022. Every vote. And it remembers that in February 2025, Israel voted at the UN for the first time during the entire war against the resolution defending Ukraine's territorial integrity, together with the US and together with Russia. The Ukrainian ambassador said it was hard to comprehend at the time. I'll explain to you now how easy it is to understand. There's nothing metaphysical about it. This is a training exercise from the realist school of international relations. A country that has voted against you for 30 years doesn't get help from you, especially when it's at war itself. Period. It doesn't get help from you when it's at war itself. Then you don't get help when you're at war. This isn't malice, it's pragmatism. Israel, besides this, is playing another complicated game. Almost 1 million Russian-speaking Jews live in Israel. Israel's security channel regarding Syria and Lebanon has historically gone through Russian Air Command. One phone call to Putin, but Israeli planes won't be able to stay over Damascus. That's too high a price for someone else's war, especially for the war of a country that has done you harm in every possible way. Let's put it that way, right? That's why Israel has never, not once in these 4 years, supplied Ukraine with a single Iron Dome system. Not a single PAC-3, only humanitarian aid and medicine, while they supply the Sunni Arabs in the Persian Gulf. Well, not PAC, of course. Yes, elements of the Iron Dome. And this in turn naturally builds up even more Ukrainian resentment toward Jews. But taking offense belongs in private life. In geopolitics, resentment is the most useless resource. In geopolitics, there are only debts. And guess what else? Arsenals, weapons. Ukraine now has a debt carried over from its past to Israel, unpaid. The only currency Ukraine can use to pay that debt is a change in behavior. Real visible, starting this very second. I promised you that you would leave this episode with a different understanding. Let's draw 4 lessons from this. They work both for Ukraine and, by the way, for each of us personally. Lesson number 1. International politics has no friends. There are only consequences. Joseph Stalin once said that the USSR has no permanent allies and no permanent enemies. It has only permanent interests. I'm not a big fan of Stalin, as you probably know. But in this phrase, he wasn't lying. I mean, overall, he was a talented person, an evil genius. But, as they say, not without abilities. Every country that forgets this law pays for its forgetfulness with the lives of its own citizens. Lesson number 2. What you sell today will shoot at you tomorrow. Exactly. What you sell today will shoot at you tomorrow. It's not just about weapons. It's about technology, ideas, reputation. Ukraine sold missiles to Iran to fix the budget in the 1990s. Well, obviously they wanted money. Today, those missiles are in the strategic arsenal of the one who supplies Shaheds against Ukraine. 25 years, a short time in history. It's a long time for us, for people. But it has passed. It has passed. The third lesson, the UN is a theater. But the arsenal, I mean the muscles, the teeth, that's reality. Voting in the General Assembly doesn't decide anything at all. The podium is just posturing. The one who votes for you from the podium may give you nothing in a moment of danger, and the one who votes against you may turn out to be the only country whose military victory will save you. Well, and the same Berdyaev, whom I've talked about many times already. I really love his book, The Philosophy of Inequality. He put it precisely. Formal equality of votes has always been a lie. Formal, so the real hierarchy is a hierarchy of will and strength. Will and strength. You definitely need a combination. Will and strength. One without the other, no matter what you have, yes, it doesn't work. Only the combination. Lesson 4. And for each of you personally, it's exactly the same in life. Every word spoken against someone just because it's trendy, because everyone says it, because there'll be no consequences for me, accumulates. And when you one day need the person you spoke against, do you think they will forget it? This, my dear friends, is that little bit of work on yourself that I talk about every day. Watch your words. Count your votes. Not votes at the UN, but your own in small conversations. They also count, they also accumulate, they come back. I don't like to end on a pessimistic note, as you know, so here's the final twist. Does Ukraine have a path? Yes, yes, yes. It's very simple. You know, it's always hard to come up with something simple, right? Ours is so simple it was just right under our noses, right? First, the UN. Stop voting against Israel. Just stop. You don't even have to vote for them. Now it might look like, well, like you're bought, that you're calling it a necessity, right? Abstain. At least abstain. Every time. Like they did in September 2024 regarding Jerusalem, that will already be a shift. It will be noticed in Jerusalem. Second, at the level of the political class, publicly acknowledge the fact. What was sold in the 1990s and in 2001 was a mistake. Not a moral mistake, but a strategic one. Zelensky already said this partly in an interview last fall, but it needs to be said loudly, not for the West. We Ukrainians need to say it to ourselves. Why? To understand that mistakes were made and to try not to make them again. Third, completely change the rhetoric. The fact that the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs compared the West Bank to Crimea in 2016 was a diplomatic disaster that lasted for 10 years. This language needs to be removed from official use. Once and for all, whether they will do this in Kyiv, I don't know. It all depends on how much Zelensky or possibly his successor will act. We'll be able to overcome such old reflexes and accept what reality demands. And reality is summed up in one phrase. Today, Ukraine needs Israel to win, quickly and decisively. Because only then will the American Patriot, instead of standing over Tel Aviv, fly to defend Kyiv. And this, my dear viewers, is not a paradox, it's a lesson. It would be good to learn from lessons and not sleep through them. A lesson about how the real world works, not the one from textbooks, not the one mothers tell their children. Everything will be fine. Oh, everything will be fine. Sleep. The one we live in. And a small personal remark, finally. 30 years ago, in the 1990s, Ukraine had a choice to become a full part of Western civilization, including its relations with Israel, or to pursue a multi-vector policy. The Ukrainian political class at that time chose the second option. For 30 years, it seemed more profitable, and Israel is so small, it has nothing. What can it offer? But those big ones, they have a lot. Maybe they'll give something. Today, the price of that choice is measured in unintercepted shaheds over the Ukrainian people. If everything had been done differently, the shaheds wouldn't be hitting. I mean, hitting the targets. This, my dear friends, is the main lesson of freedom, the one Galambus wrote about, and the one Hillel repeated 2,000 years ago. Never do to others what you wouldn't want done to yourself. This is not a sentimental rule. This is not philosophy. This is a law of survival. And when nations break it, the consequences come in 25 years. Well, maybe in 30 or in 100, but they do come. Gentlemen, look at history. They always come. Always. If you have one person in your life to whom you want to pass on this lesson, send them this episode. That's enough. Tomorrow at the same time, the next episode will be on the main channel, 30 minutes of news and analysis. Maybe there will be one episode, maybe two. I don't know. I already said when the topics are very different, I do two. And if you want a deeper, more foundational analysis without the news rush, with Galambus, Berdyaev, and Hillel, come to the Roadmap to Freedom. That's a separate channel. There are 2 episodes a week there for those who like to dig in, think, and analyze. The link will be in the description. And remember, every word you say today is a seed of what will come to you tomorrow. See you soon.